onto this computer. Okay. All right. We are recording now. Welcome to Unit 1 Foundations. We are now doing Part 2. And let's come over to what we were talking about last class. So we're still working on our constitutional principles. And so I had asked you don't want to see my homework from my other class. I had asked you to do some questions for me. And my questions disappeared. So, okay, dude, did you just see that? Like I hit new tab and 20 new tabs open. I don't know what is happening to my computer. It is having a moment. So let's see what happens when I hit this. Okay, I had this all set up before you guys. So let's go over some of the questions as we're talking about the Constitution, and then we will get into a little more meat of the content. So, all right, guys. Great compromise. Who wants to take it? We would have a bicameral legislature with a lower house based on population and an upper house with equal representation. How many for every state? It's way more fun if you engage with me. 2. How many members are there in the House of Representatives?
435.
Thank you, Nathan. All right, what's the Electoral College?
A group of people
Thank you.
that vote for the president. They were set up by, I guess, the founding fathers, the Constitution writers, whatever they're called, basically as a safeguard against stupid Americans.
Ah, yes. And you need how many to win? Electors.
Isn't it like one more than half?
270. Take 238, divide by 2. Take 538, divide by 2, plus 1. All right. The 3/5 compromise was how slaves would be counted for representation and taxation. So one slave would be worth 3/5 of a person. Literally one of the worst things I can think of. Slavery, basically the Constitution decides what, okay? This is where we kind of, these two things, they still discuss later. They do decide, remember, to do no, they do decide that they're gonna end slave trade. Sorry, had a little brain freeze there for a moment. All right, this is the stuff we really want to focus on. So, what is separation of powers? So this is one of our main ideas of American democracy, of the Constitution. This is the kind of stuff I think you're going to see questions on. So separation of powers is the idea that each branch has, distinct powers as laid out in the Constitution. Okay. Checks and balances. Ways for each branch to check the other to make sure what? That no one branch is to what? Powerful. All right, federalism. I gave you the definition yesterday. Who's going to be my golden ticket here and give me the definition today? Sydney's ready. She unmuted, man. She was ready. All right, go, Sydney.
It's the shared powers between the national and state governments, with the national government being supreme.
Excellent. Okay, Enumerated powers. I bet there's a pocket constitution somewhere in my desk drawer at my house. I'm that nerdy, yes. Enumerated powers. So these are listed powers, okay? Specifically, we're talking about like the enumerated powers of Congress, which would be found in Article 1.
1, Section 8.
Yes, all the good ones are there, okay? All right, implied powers. Also found in the necessary and proper clause, also called the elastic clause, right? So it's this idea that that Congress can make laws necessary to implement other stuff in the Constitution. Other enumerated powers. Give me an example of an implied power.
Taxation.
Enumerated.
Oh, never mind. Creation of the Air Force.
Yes, I apparently have trained you well. Okay, so it says that they can regulate the military, right? Regulate the Navy, regulate the Army, so therefore creating of an Air Force. So we were talking about the post office, right? And how that it's been nationalized. So that's another great example, how it talks about in the Constitution, the creation of a post office. And so all the rules and stuff that come with it, that'd be the necessary proper clause. All right, what constitutional clause gives Congress implied powers? Well, that's the what clause we just said, right? The necessary and proper clause. What clause gives the president implied powers?
Is that Article 1, Section 7?
Yes. So when we think about, like, this is a term we don't ever use. Like, have you guys ever, I've never used the term vesting clause. So it's that idea that, you know, he has power and it's kind of vague. This is where we kind of get the ideas of like executive orders and things like that. So in the oath of office that he takes, that the power is, you know, like when a priest marries people, what does he say? By the power vested in me, you know, given by God, given by the state of Virginia, okay? So it's that, I like to think of these two as vested powers. To me, it's almost like inherent powers would be a way I think of vested powers. So, all right, reserve powers are for the states. And what amendment are they in?
10th.
Yes. Okay. All right, concurrent powers. These are shared powers between the state and national government. And an example, the one that everybody uses, taxing. What did you have, Zane? What's the different one you used?
I was going to jump in and say taxing.
All right, Dolan Cooperative Federalism. Let's talk about our cake.
Okay, it's like when there's like a divine line between what the state and what the federal government can do, like there's no mixing.
Yes, so this is historically more present, okay? And where there is a clear division of powers between the federal and state government. So historically, like what would be a good example of this? Education is a fantastic, like historically was always state thing, but with No Child Left Behind and then ESSA, and then like as Secretary of Education Carney stated, we see that the federal government is more and more involved. Cooperative federalism, oh my, look at all my formatting. Cooperative federalism is marble cake. And this is a mixing of powers. So for example, and this is more common today. So historically, Medicaid, Medicare, all that stuff was always federal government. And so how that's dispersed now and stuff is given more to the states. So the states are taking something that has historically always been a federal government, and now they're working on it. Okay. All right. So fiscal federalism. So we've got these grants that we love to talk about, right? So we've got mandates, we've got categorical grants, and we've got block grants. So who wants to take a mandate?
Isn't it something like you have to do, like, but you don't get funded for it?
Okay. Does the next one say example? So who wants to give me a good example of that one?
Wasn't that like the Americans with Disability Act or something like that?
ADA, Americans with Disability Act. You remember that they had to do all this private units, colleges, all had to do handicap accessible. All right, so
UVA is not handicap accessible.
what?
UVA is not handicap accessible.
Has to be.
There are certain dorms that are, but there's like a couple of the dorms are not at all.
Do they get it because it's historical?
Mm-hmm.
That would be so that'd be the only exception, because it would destroy the historical integrity of the building to change it. Okay, so the balance of power. Who has more power in this situation? The
federal government.
So it's more power to the federal government because they are the one dictating it. Okay. All right. Categorical grants. Tell me about categorical grants.
It's like when the government gives you money, but you have to spend it on a certain thing, like education, for example.
Okay. So we could say like NCLB, No Child Left Behind. So you get money for education. It's very specific, like where it needs to go to. Okay. So this is, again, more power to the federal government, because money, as we know, can often be a way that the government manipulates the states. All right, block grants. States get money, but with less restrictions, right? Basically, as I like to think of it, you get a chunk, a block, a chunk of money, okay? And they may say you have to spend it on, say, transportation, and then you decide, do you want to spend it on roads? Do you want to build up your airports? Do you want to change your Amtrak or whatever kind of thing like that? So this is more power to the states. Okay, so as our country has progressed, our federal government has gotten bigger and bigger. Okay, and so the states have to get power wherever they can. So they love things like this that give them more power. Okay. So there were people who were opposed to just take a moment to talk about something that's kind of completely different. There are people who were very much opposed to selective incorporation. Who remembers and could tell us what selective incorporation is?
Isn't that like the application of the Bill of Rights over time or something like that?
Yeah, so like think about, like, for example, Gideon versus Wainwright, where they gave the right to a lawyer, your Sixth Amendment was applied. So Florida would feel like that's restricting their power because they had made that decision. So does that make sense, how that the federal government, the states could see that as taking away some of their power, their decision making, if you will. All right, so the 10th, so all these kind of are, we're talking about that same kind of idea. So the 10th Amendment, this is reserved powers for the states, right? That anything not specifically mentioned goes to the states. So this is usually more power to the states. There are exceptions, like for example, historically, education, marriage has always been left up to the states. But that changed, of course, with Obergefell versus Hyges when they determined that. 14th Amendment, what's the 14th Amendment? Everyone at once. I like to know when my computer no longer works. 14th Amendment. Hello? Like equal protection, due process, any of that stuff sound vaguely familiar to you guys? You know, literally one of the longest amendments in the entire Constitution. And if I could only keep one amendment out of all of them, the 14th is the one I would keep. So maybe just a little bit important. Okay.
We only did the projects about court cases, and every single one of our projects was about the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, so it's, you know, not a big one. So like, yeah, 14th Amendment. So this would be the equal protection. Two clauses, right? So it's the equal protection, and what's the other clause?
Due process?
So remember that the equal protection, so we're thinking like equal protection, this is where we get the whole idea of civil rights protection, right? Okay. And so through the due process clause, this is where we got selective incorporation we were just talking about. So 14th Amendment, massively important. Okay, one of those big ones we got to know. Okay, there's so many ways they could weave this in. So I'm thinking this concept question, I don't know. I keep thinking the argumentative is somehow going to relate to like civil liberties and civil rights, tying in because that's such an important thing. And I keep thinking the concept is going to have to do with like federalism or like checks and balances. Like that's my, I mean, I can be totally wrong. We know this. I don't even know. They may even do multiple questions. Like you guys might all get different questions, you know, like maybe they have 12 concept questions and you all get a different one. So to keep you from like, you know, texting each other. We were talking about this whole idea of like cheating and stuff because a lot of teachers, you can always tell when you're grading the test, like all these kids had the same teacher because they kept using the same term. So there was this term I had never heard before, which was the electronic throne. And we were all like, what is that? And one of the teachers at our table was like, oh yeah, like, you know, the president, like social media and all this stuff. I was like, I'd never even heard that term. But every like kid from the same school was like using that term. And so I know there's probably terms that I use. So they're not worried about things like that. It's just if your essays are exactly alike because you were texting each other in the middle of it and working together. That would be cheating. That would be bad. All right, Commerce Clause. This is all about trade, right? Trade, money. Give me some way. So give me an example of an overstep. What's an overstep of the Commerce Clause?
Wasn't there that case where they tried to restrict gun rights through the Commerce Clause?
Was it Lopez?
Something versus, like Texas versus Lopez?
About U.S. versus Lopez, but it did happen in Texas, okay? All right, where would be, we would say one that we would say, we're okay with this. We don't think it's not an overstep.
Interstate commerce.
Mcculloch versus Maryland? Maybe.
Are you doing Mcculloch versus Maryland? Is that what you're saying? I think you're thinking Mcculloch versus Maryland would be Supremacy Clause. Gibbons versus Ogden is the Steamboat case. The one that I like, one of my favorite cases of all time. Are we ready for it?
Is it the map?
That is one of my favorite. Heart of Atlanta. Come on. We use the Commerce Clause to desegregate. Like, come on. Okay. So you're, do we have you guys are like Monday morning on a Tuesday night. I can only see Zane and Sydney's face. They're like getting the brunt of my, let's see if I can see. Oh, I see Shaylee. All right. I moved her. So she's up there now. Nathan's inconspicuous. All right, necessary and proper clause. So we've already kind of done this one before. I'm going to come up here and copy and paste my little blah, blah, blah here. Okay. And so this would increase the power of the federal government. So let's come back to those court cases. So what would be that great example of a court case? That would defend the necessary and proper clause.
Marbury versus Madison?
That's judicial review, dear. Mcculloch versus Maryland, which I think I spelled Mcculloch wrong. So let me Google that one since I never, oh, look at that. I knew I spelled it wrong. All right, Mcculloch, not McCullough. McCulloch. Okay, McCulloch versus Maryland. So this is the whole national bank. If I write that, does that ring your bells? The whole national bank, that they had the power to create a national bank. Okay, and that Maryland could not tax the United States government. All right. Okay, Supremacy Clause. This is Article, Lucy,
1.
ranchers and cooks.
Oh, it's 7. 6.
Lucy each, Jolly Ranchers, and cooks. That'd be 6, dear. Okay, 6. Okay, the Constitution is supreme. So I would say, best example here that I can think of off the top of my head, Brown versus Board of Education. 14th Amendment, dude, trumps the ignorant racist people who thought that that was okay. Let's call them out for what they are. Ignorant racist. Okay. All right. So these questions, these were the more difficult questions to kind of think about these. All right. How does public education showcase the complexity of federalism? I love this question. I didn't write it and I love it. It makes me happy. Does anyone have a thought?
It illustrates the, I don't know, issues that arise from two separate governments having control over a single topic of policy.
Okay. All right. So let's think about this. Historically, states have been in charge of education, right? It was almost, if you would say, maybe an unofficial reserve power. Okay. That would be, I would say that the states saw it as a reserve power. Now, because of an identified policy issue that maybe our education wasn't where we thought it should be compared to other countries, we decided that the federal government decided they need to get involved. Remember that the Department of Education, which is a cabinet office, has only been around since Jimmy Carter, okay? The cabinet office of the Department of Education was created under Carter, so it's not even that old, all right? So think about that. So then with the national government making policy and laws like No Child Left Behind, can I just write NCLB? Do we all know what that is? Okay, so like No Child Left Behind, or the new one, which is replacing that, is ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, okay? And you could still reference No Child Left Behind. Everybody knows what that is. AYP, okay? I bet, Cindy, you heard your mama talk about that, and because she was a principal, you know, everybody talks about that. The adequate yearly progress. We got to meet this. You guys have heard people talk about accreditation, the pressure of SOLs, all of those things. So when the national government starts making policy like that and then offering money to states, okay, based on performance, like we need you, Common Core is another great example, okay? Virginia, have we taken Common Core? No. So Virginia said no. So we get no federal funding, okay, for Common Core. So we missed out on that money, but we felt that our stuff was good enough. Okay, so it's a complex relationship because remember that the federal government uses money to manipulate the states to get them to do what they want them to do. All right? So whenever we take something that has historically been a power that was always set aside for the states and the federal government starts getting involved, people get a little upset. Even the fact of, you can look at that at the local level, because when Governor Northam closed the schools, did he issue a mandate that said, okay, all of the Virginia, however many districts and divisions there are, we're all going to do it this way? Did he do that? No, he did not. Very specifically, it says, districts, it's up to you. So we still haven't decided how we're grading quarter 4 for our underclassmen. You guys, we decided that seniors were a priority. We made that decision for you guys early on. They still haven't decided. When I talked to Dr. Shook the other week, he said, we're looking at what other counties are doing and other things, like they're still working on that decision. And I think we're pretty close to one, but they got guidelines from the state superintendent, but they haven't made an official decision. So a lot of education even is still local based. Yeah, Zane.
I just want to say one of the kids in the UVA group chat was talking about what his county's doing. I think he's from Loudoun County or something. If you have 2 quarters in which you have an 85 or above or something like that, so like if you have like a quarter where you get a, like say an A, you get a 100 for Q4, and so they look at your final grade. If it's at say like an 89, they just automatically round it up to an A. If it's at say an 89, they just round it up to a or like a 79, they round it up to a B.
That's
so
very
like
generous.
they take your highest quarter grade and then round it up to the highest letter grade if it's like within a couple points.
That kind of negates the fact, the two, that how many students don't do work fourth quarter. But anyway, okay. All right. How does the legalization of marijuana showcase federalism?
Because like the states, they're allowed to do it until the federal government comes in and says you can't do it anymore. And it's also kind of, you know, kind of experiments of how it's gonna work. It shows the federal government that stuff like that.
Okay, so an advantage of federalism, and this is one of those great times where what you've learned in comparative becomes over. So advantage of federalism is it allows for experiments, right? Experimentation. I cannot type tonight, guys. All right, and so thank goodness for spell check, right? So allows for experimentation. So some states have passed and legalized marijuana, right? In spite of the federal law that prohibits it, right? And then what happened? What did it started with President Obama. President Obama said, let it go, right? Let states do as they will. So it's a very interesting thing that states are being allowed to go against what the federal government says in spite of the Supremacy Clause. And so this is where, say, it's legal in Oregon, not legal in Idaho. Does Idaho border Oregon? I feel like it does.
Yes, it does. Sorry.
Thank you. All right. Okay, what other current issues involving federalism? Any other things you can think of? So I would say prior to, okay, let's try to spell it. Versus Hyges, we had DOMA. Do I need to write Defense of Marriage Act, or we remember that? We don't remember, or?
Wait,
okay.
I remember.
Okay, I'm gonna put it here. So it's the Defense of Marriage Act, which was signed by President Clinton, that said that states did not have to recognize same-gender marriages from other states. So prior to Obergefell versus Hyges, this was one of those where it was an argument because of full faith and credit clause. And this is one where people, can you imagine this? You ready? People in America were hypocritical. No, right? So, for example, this is my favorite one. So people who are opposed to same-gender marriage for religious reasons did not have any problem with, say, Virginia recognizing common law marriage from Georgia. So if you have a religious reason for being opposed to homosexuality, wouldn't you also have a religious reason for being opposed to people who aren't married, living together, posing as a married couple? So Virginia, sorry, little soapbox of Miss DeLong. So Virginia recognizes, prior to Defense of Marriage, prior to all the homosexual marriage, Virginia has always recognized common law marriage, okay? There are 6 or 9 states that still practice common law marriage, okay? And which is interesting, if you enter in common law marriage, you still have to officially get divorced. But anyway, we recognized that even though it wasn't legal in our state. So full faith and credit clause was the reason that we did. So then why didn't we recognize same-gender marriage? Which then Virginia passed in our Constitution to specifically say that we were opposed to same-gender marriage so that we could say, well, our Constitution says that. But then it all got overturned with Obergefell versus Hodges. Can you guys think of any other one? I don't know any rules about like adoption and stuff like that, which might be controversial with LGBT. I don't know how that works, like cross state lines. What about like transgender? Is that a new issue too when we think about that? Like, remember when we talked about that guy, I can't remember his name, who had changed his birth in like New Jersey and like New York didn't recognize it on his driver's license, you know, those kind of things. All right, so I will share that with you guys. So let's come back over here. I want to look at a couple of things and then do a couple little practice questions. So we left off last night, we were talking about, dun, 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 dun. All right, let's look at, we've got Federalist 51 and Federalist 10. So Federalist 10 is all about what? What one word?
Factions.
Ding, ding, ding. And Federalist 51 is all about what? 3 words.
Separation of powers.
Ding, ding, ding. All right. So all right. In order to lay a due foundation for that separate and this is and a distinct exercise of different powers of the government, which to a certain extent is admitted on all hands to be essential to the preservation of liberty. Okay. Rephrase that. Tell me that in modern English. Why do we need to have different powers of the government? Why do we need to have separation of power? What does it say? What's this key thing where it says it's essential to preserve what?
Preserve the rights of the people.
Yeah, to preserve liberty, our freedom. Going back to that idea of natural rights, right? Social contract, all of those things. And that if everybody had a will of its own, if everybody just did whatever they wanted, then oh my word, how bad would that be? That's why we need to have separation of powers, and that's why we need to have checks and balances, okay? Where this principle rigorously adhered to, so where this is something that we see it happening, it will require that all the appointments would be drawn from the same fountain of authority, the people through channels having no communication with each other, okay? So that is very specifically separation of powers because they're all doing their own thing. But that's the beauty of checks and balances though, isn't it? How that everything crosses over, that they get that Congress writes the policy. That's that specific power. But then the executive branch enforces the policy. It's carried out. And then the judicial branch, if needed, judges the policy. All right. So let's talk about abuse of power. So has abuse of power ever happened in our country? Yeah.
Never.
Well, actually, nobody's ever been found guilty of it, right? So we know that now 4 presidents have been impeached, okay? But none of them have ever been found guilty of it. And so Nixon, of course, 3 presidents have been impeached. Look at me, I'm going ahead of myself. Nixon, of course, resigned before he was impeached. All right, so let's come over. I want to look at some concept questions. I told you we would talk about content. Now let's practice this. Now, before I go into this, let's take a little moment here. Let me stop sharing. How are we feeling about federalism? Okay.
Pretty good.
Let's hit the highlights. We think about federalism. So when we think about federalism, a large republic is Madison's solution to the divisions within our country that we really truly want. You know, the ideal is participatory democracy, but it's not necessarily what's actually happening. But we do have a large republic where everybody has the opportunity to have a voice, to work together. In Federalist 51, he argued the idea that we need to have checks and balances and separation of power. Remember that Madison famously said, if men were what? Angels, we would need government, right? So we got to have something to keep us in line, which to me tells me that he's not 100% fully convinced by Locke. So that to me sounds a little bit like Hobbes, right? That we got to have somebody to keep us in line, okay? Which I think both men make very good points. All right, so we have in our country, we have the Declaration of Independence, which set up our big ideals. So let's think about what those ideals are. Social contract, that agreement that the government is there to protect our rights, which is another important concept, natural rights. If the government breaks that contract, we have the right to rebel after we've tried all the peaceful means. That's what the whole Declaration of Independence is all about, right? That we're all created equal, that we're given by our Creator when in the course of human events is how it starts, right? And he says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, natural rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, okay? So nobody can take those away. This is why governments are instituted among men, okay, so that we can have these things. So we try the Articles of Confederation, which is a confederal system, putting the power in the hands of the states, and it doesn't work. It fails. They're too weak. They don't have the power to tax. They don't have the power to really implement, or let's be honest, they can't even really make a lot of good policy, okay? So they then write a constitution. In this constitution, they use Montesquieu's idea of 3 branches of government. They set up an executive branch, a legislative branch, judicial branch. They almost go home arguing over how we're going to do our Congress. And they finally agree under the Great Compromise. Remember the most important man in the room? Roger Sherman, right? He's the guy who comes up with the Great Compromise. So Roger Sherman comes up with that. They agree. They do also the compromise of Electoral College, and they set up the foundations of our government. They go home. Anti-Federalists are upset. They don't like what they're reading. They're like, this government is too strong. You went the opposite way. Like, we'll admit the states maybe had a little too much power, but now you're taking all of it away. And Brutus makes that argument. He says, we're too big. This whole idea that Madison has that a large republic is going to solve the problem, it's just going to create more problems. And on top of all that, you didn't even address our individual liberties. Not even one little word. And what's super important to Americans, do you know that there is actually people who are arguing that one of the reasons that coronavirus has hit us so bad, it's because of our sense of freedom? Okay, does that make sense? Look at the people protesting right now who feel like their rights are being inflicted on. India has like nothing compared to what we have right now. India, where people are packed in like sardines, has nothing on our statistics right now for coronavirus. Isn't that fascinating that other countries can look at the way that our country is and say, your little sense of freedom and liberty is going to get you guys in trouble? Okay, I think that's interesting. So all that being said, we hold that so strongly. And of course, we know that the first job, once the Constitution is passed of Congress, is to give us that Bill of Rights, okay? So the Constitution outlines some important concepts. We got to make sure we remember that the Constitution is supreme. We do have a federal government where powers are shared. We're going to give some to the federal, we're going to give some to the state, we're going to work together. But when it comes to it, federal law trumps, right? Federal law trumps state law. No pun intended, okay? And so federal law is always going to supersede state law. It's always going to, and the Constitution is always going to be supreme. When the Supreme Court, when they go to look at something, what do they go to? They go to the Constitution. What does the Constitution say? Okay? All right. Now, how does federalism actually work? What does it look like in our day-to-day affairs? How does it work? So historically, we had that that dual federalism where divisions were very clear. Today, it's hard. Is it a state issue? Is it a federal issue? There's so much intermarrying of things because the federal government has so much to do. They need help. That's why they gave Medicaid to the states. They're like, we can't do all this. We're going to give you some of that. Okay? We're going to give you some of that power. And the states are like, we need some help with education. We could use some funding. Government's like, we'll give you money. You just got to do what we say, right? Okay? When you think about, is money a manipulator? Why is drinking 21? That's all you got to remember, right? Is money a way that the government manipulates us? Definitely. Okay. All right. You feel a little bit better about federalism? Okay. Let's flip over. Let's just do a couple of practice questions together. Probably helps if I share my screen. All right. We're going to look at some concept analysis questions that I borrowed from some of my nerdy teacher friends. Okay. Let's start with, all right, let's do this one. Let's do question number 3. I'll make it a little bigger here. The United States was set up as a democracy under the Articles of Confederation and the United States Constitution. Okay. So think about it. It's going to be, 3-point question, right? Identify 2 key functions of a government. Describe the difference between a direct democracy and an indirect democracy. Explain how Hobbes and Locke viewed social contract theory. I do not think this would be your question, but this gives us an idea to practice some of the concepts we've been talking about. All right. So, someone want to tell me a function of a government?
Protection of the right of the people.
Yes. I was going to give you a hint. So we've talked about the term failed state, right? That Nigeria is a failed state or could be a failed state. What is Nigeria doing or not doing that makes it a failed state? What is the government is it not doing?
Functioning.
Is it providing for the basic needs of its people? Is it providing the services for its people? Is that what a government, should a government provide goods and services for its people? That's what we pay taxes for, right? Okay. What else? What are some other functions of a government?
Maybe to like defend from like foreign
Yep.
stuff like that.
And it's not only outside, but also inside. That's one of the reasons that Lincoln fights so hard to preserve the Union. Like he's like, we won't let it fall apart. Like we're supposed to protect from internal and external, okay, domestic or foreign. Any other thoughts? There's so many things we could say. What about to make laws? To keep order, make policy? Any of those? Okay. What's the difference between a direct and an indirect democracy?
Doesn't that have to do with like the method of voting and stuff? So like a direct democracy, people vote for stuff, whereas for an indirect democracy, we elect representatives to decide for us.
So I'm going to give you a term. You tell me if it's direct or indirect democracy. A referendum.
Direct.
Everybody's getting to vote. It becomes law. Okay. How would Hobbes and Locke differ on social contract theory?
I think Hobbes would have really liked indirect. Oh, never mind. Wrong.
Well, Hobbes wouldn't really like democracy in general, right? So Hobbes believed that we needed to have an absolute ruler to keep us in line because man is naturally evil and selfish. And so therefore we got to have somebody to keep us out of trouble. Okay. So we don't have the right to rebel. Locke, on the other hand, social contract theory, remember, is that agreement that we enter into that government is instituted to protect our rights. And if they stop protecting those rights, we have the right, the contract's been broken and we have the right to rebel. Everybody with me? All right. This one. This is like the Mama Jamma summing up everything we've been talking about here. Okay. Well, let's even make it a different color. Like this is the one. How is that blue? Is that bad? How about green? All right. Federalism is a key component in the United States government. The division of power across levels of government influences how people view and understand the functions of government. This is a comparative question. Identify unitary, confederal, and federal systems of government. They just made you do 3 things to get 1 little measly point.
I have confederal and federal.
All right, give me confederal.
So
We'll
in
do
a
one of each.
federal
Okay.
system, there is division of power between, I guess we could say, national and state governments, with the state governments being supreme.
Very good. Okay. Who wants to take unitary?
I can attempt it.
All right, go ahead.
So wouldn't that just be a single sovereign government, like, that controls the entirety of a territory without competition? I don't know.
It's the opposite of confederal in the fact that your national government has the majority of the power, that some power may be devolved to the local governments. Okay, so unitary, China and UK. All right. And then federal, Sydney defined it for us earlier, that where we have power shared between the national and state governments, with the state governments being supreme. So remember, you have to always say power is always shared, but in the difference with federalism, it's more equal. In a confederal, there's very little sharing. Almost all of it's in the state governments, versus in a unitary, very little sharing because it's almost all in the central government. Okay, that's the difference. Describe how the Supremacy Clause affects how the government functions. Most of the time, our government states everything just goes along its business, right? Everybody does its own thing. Everybody does its own thing until there is a conflict where? When what conflicts with what?
When two states conflict.
With Supremacy Clause, it's really not necessarily about two states conflicting, but it's when a state law conflicts with
The federal law.
Federal law.
Okay, so think about this. Could the Drug Enforcement Agency go in and seize all of the marijuana in Colorado and Oregon and Washington and California, and
Virginia
420,
soon.
so people wouldn't even know it was gone, right? That's my bad joke. All right, so people, could they go in? Could they legally go in and seize it? Yes, they can, because federal law says that marijuana is illegal. However, okay, President Obama said, let it go. And President Trump has upheld that as well. Every once in a while, the DEA will just go in. They don't deal a whole lot with individuals. It's the big sellers that they're more concerned with, okay? So can you give an example when you're writing these essays? Yes, I encourage you to give an example because it strengthens your argument. If I am reading your question, okay, if I'm reading your test this summer in June, when I'm reading the test and Shaylee's test pops up on my screen, the likelihood I would get Shaylee's after I got Rhiannon's is like a statistical improbability, right? So Shaylee's pops up on my screen. She didn't handwrite it. She typed it. I don't even know it's Shaylee's, right? I'm reading it. She kind of describes Supremacy Clause, and I'm like, I'm on that. Who do I give her the point? Do I not give her the point? And then she gives me this fabulous example talking about marijuana in Colorado. And I'm like, no doubt, this girl knows it. She just got the point. Okay? So the example can seal the deal for you. So remember that. All right. Explain one way in which the federal government can use money to influence state and local governments.
I can do that. They can use mandates and grants to well, I guess they could just use mandates to, like, force the state to change something about its policy, and then grants to influence the state to do something.
Yes. Okay. So anytime that they possibly are using money to influence the states, I would give a specific example. I would talk about a mandate, or I would talk about a categorical or a block grant. Okay. Give a specific example. That's going to make your argument, especially because it's 3 points. So you're probably only even writing 3 sentences. Okay. We're not wasting time on introductions. We're not doing any of that mess. Get in, get out, right? 15 minutes. And a question like that, we just answered, you know, in 5, and we're like picking it apart. Okay. So that's all you got to do is you just got to break it down, and it's going to be short like that. And it's going to be where you're going to have to really, do you hear that? Have you heard that phrase, they separate the wheat from the chaff? Okay. Where they go in and they pull apart the wheat, like there's the good part and the bad part, right? There are 2 questions, guys. There are usually 200,000 kids taking this test. They're not giving everybody 5s, okay? There's gonna be a tight rubric. So you think about that. Am I just gonna answer that question as quick as possible, or am I gonna give that example to help strengthen my answer? Because I wanna make sure I get that 4 or 5. I wanna make sure I get that college credit. You put in the work, get that college credit, okay? Don't let them take that away from you, okay? Because you didn't write that one more little sentence, all right? So think about that. Any question that they're giving you, think about this. All right, is there an example I could give that would make this stronger? Especially for part B and C, like that's really where you're selling it. It's usually, A is usually like a definition, identify, right? Because wasn't that what we just did? We did definition, didn't we? And then we got into that higher level verbs of the describe, explain, okay? So that's really would be my advice for you. And I think we have a very good chance of getting a federalism type question, something like that, like power to the states, whatever. If it's not that, then I think it's going to be something checks and balances-ish, because so much of Unit 1 is federalism. And then Unit 2 is all about the branches of government, right? And then Unit 3 is our civil liberties and civil rights. That's the 3 topics we got to pick from, okay? So as much as they can interweave them, they will. And so I think federalism makes a perfect one to interweave. All right, give me some, let's do a little other brainstorming here. Tell me some ways that we see federalism in our country. Can you think of anything that would be something that we have in our government that we can see how federalism plays out? I'm gonna give you an example. The Electoral College is an example of federalism because the states are electing a national leader, right? Okay, so whenever we see something that happens where both parties are involved. I gave you an example yesterday. Anybody got a thought? And Mr. Larson and Mr. Canine talked about it in the video today, because I was just rewatching it before I saw y'all so I could bring some stuff up. How about, you know, that little old-fashioned thing called amending the Constitution that we do, that we've done 27 times formally? All right, so amending the Constitution, because we've got the state, we got the national government, right? We were seeing both. Election of senators, election of our congressmen, right? I think election of senators is even better because that represents our whole state versus a member of Congress only represents a district. Okay, so they're going to go to the national government. They're going to represent us all. Miss Waldron texted me. She said she saw Senator Mark Warner was on the news tonight. She said that his kitchen was in his background. It looked a lot like mine. She asked me had I kidnapped him. I said no. But he's a perfect example. Like, he's representing Virginia on this national level. But when we see Senator Newman on TV, is that an example of federalism? No, because Senator Newman is just our Virginia in the Virginia Senate. Okay, so you got to think about federalism. They're looking for something that sees it on both sides. Okay, so that dual federalism or cooperative federalism, or thinking about the role of states, like how have powers of states been limited? Okay, how have we seen an increase of power? Which one increases power? Which one decreases power? So for example, block grants and reserve powers increase the powers of states. Mandates and categorical grants, those decrease the power of states. Okay, you can even argue, you know, there's so many things you can argue. They may give you a choice. They may even say, like, of these 3 things, pick 2. And explain how there was a great question a couple of years ago. I think I've even given it to you in class. And it was something like, tell how the following have limited the power of states. And it was like, Amendment number 10 and block grants. And then it was like, tell how these powers have increased the power, or that would be increased power of states, limit the power of states, and it was categorical grants and mandates, okay? And so you have to tell both of them. Sometimes they might say choose 2 out of 3. I'm thinking they're not gonna let you get any choice because they're gonna give you a, open note. Will you get a choice in your argumentative? Yes, because you gotta pick a side, right? Okay, so that's where you're gonna get your choice. All right, concept is just answer the question, okay? That one's not hard, it's just answering the question, okay? All right, how are we feeling? Better, worse, same, different?
I just got or I was scrolling through Twitter, got a little notification from the mayor of Charlottesville. She says that she wants that if it were up to her, that UVA students would not be returning to campus in the fall.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is
that's fun.
federalism. President Trump has said that it's up to individual states to make this decision about opening back up. Is there political pressure? Sure. And what do you also notice? More of the Republican governor states are opening up more than some of the Democratic states. Do you notice any of that difference too?
Georgia's open right now. There's a kid in a group chat from Savannah who was like, there's people out on the beach right now.
Alabama opened back too, and they haven't had a decrease of cases any day. They just keep going up. Now, you do have to watch media though. Let me show you something real quickly. I don't have share screen on right now, do I?
Mm-mm.
Okay. All right, so Jimmy posted this. All right, so do you notice anything funny about this?
Share screen's still not on.
What? Probably helps if I actually hit the button. Los Angeles County records highest day like of corona deaths. Jacksonville Beach packed as Florida coronavirus cases hit. That is the exact same picture, guys. Which one's Jacksonville Beach in Florida and which one's California? And picture taken.
All I can say is it looks like the one on the right does not look like any Florida beach I've ever been on.
But I mean, so we got to be careful, don't we? Because, I was seeing all those pictures like, oh yeah, look at all those crazy people in Florida. And now I'm like, oh, maybe it's not so bad in Florida. So linkage institutions are not going to be on your test, but this is a wonderful example. There's a lot of accusation that the media, of course, is driving a lot of this. So I'm going to tell you what, I do not envy the president right now or envy the governor right now. I cannot imagine the stress that either one of them are under, having to run the country, run the state, and make the decisions that they are having to make, and knowing that no matter what they decide, somebody, a large group of people, will not be happy, no matter what they say, no matter what. Like it's impossible. And how do you balance safety versus rights versus security versus the economy? These are tough decisions, guys, that our leaders are having to make. And yeah, I don't envy them. Ms. DeLong won't be running for president.
Could you at least run for like Charlottesville mayor?
I probably keep it close to Zane. Oh, I don't know. It's hard. So yeah, like I was even just like scared taking milk over to my grandma's because I don't want to get her sick, So she was out of milk, need to take her milk, right? She wants to give me a hug, and I'm like, okay, we can side hug it. So,
Like my grandfather, like my mom tried dropping something off at his house, and he was like, "Leave it on the porch. I'll come out and get it later."
aw, that's rough.
No, he's not. He's a